We're going to bring in now Senator Rob Portman of Ohio, and so much of this drama, Senator Portman, first of all, welcome, has been taking place on the House side, where Representative Boehner seems to be working with his caucus, just as people on the Senate side are working with theirs. I suspect that there's an awful lot of frustration on Capitol Hill, but there is an awful lot of frustration in the country as Americans watch once again what appears to them to be the dysfunctionality of Congress at a time when the economy is struggling and Americans are struggling with expensive gasoline, not to mention job worries. What can you say to the American people today about what's taking place before their very eyes?
Well, I would say that I agree with you. Washington is letting down the American people, and it's pretty silly because it's over a relatively small part of the overall budget. We're talking less than 1% of the budget, when the fact is we must do much bigger things to deal with the record deficits and debts that we have today. It's impacting the economy. It's hurting jobs. In places like Ohio, we already have over 9% unemployment. So the White House and the Congress needs to get its act together. The House has passed legislation. John Boehner just talked about it. The legislation is a continuing resolution to keep government open. It funds the troops for the full remaining fiscal year, and it provides relatively small and I think very reasonable spending reductions for this year. And now I think it's up to the White House and the Republicans and the Democrats to get together and to make this agreement so we can move on to what are really much bigger issues, and that is how to deal with the larger deficit and debt.
So you would favor the Senate taking up the House stopgap bill, even though we've had plenty of continuing resolutions, and in fact this budget really should have been done last summer, shouldn't it?
Tyler, you're absolutely right. By the way, I favor the stopgap spending measure as the only alternative we have right now. What I don't favor is the way in which Congress has not legislated. Last year, you're right, for the first time since 1974, which is when the Budget Act came into place, for the first time since 1974, neither house passed a budget. So Congress didn't do its work last year. Recall, the president was in power, the House was Democratic, the Senate was Democratic, and they did not pass the appropriations bills. That's why the continuing resolutions were necessary, and that's why we're in the mess we're in. But even forgetting that,
forgive me for interrupting, sir, I beg your pardon. I gather some 800,000 federal workers would be furloughed as of midnight tonight, and paychecks for soldiers who are fighting for this country would be put on hold. Presumably they would be paid back pay at some point. But I note with some irony that members of Congress will continue to be paid. Maybe their staffs won't. Do you think that sounds fair at all?
No, it doesn't sound fair. I guess it's constitutional. I'm one of those members of the Senate who has said that if we end up in a shutdown, that I will not take my salary, and in fact will give it back to deficit reduction. But look, we've got to deal with these issues. If we can't deal with these small issues, we're talking about less than 1% of our $3.7 trillion budget. How are we going to be able to deal with the bigger problems that we face as a country? We've got to get the economy back on track, and we have to get this fiscal house in order because it's hurting the economy. We now have the largest deficit in the history of our country. The debt is unfathomable now. We're already at $14 trillion, going up under the president's budget, doubling it. It's the time to come together, put partisanship aside, and solve these problems. What we need to do today is simply pass this stopgap measure to give ourselves a little more time to deal with the longer-term problems. But we need to address this and address it now before the government shuts down.
Senator Portman, a voice of reason, thank you very much for joining with